Just a little mic that picks up in the digital signal directly to the camera. At Christmas time, just as a little aside, there's often amusing things that happen. There was a church leader who had the responsibility of putting out the poster outside the front of his church, a long banner they used to put up with a scripture text on it each year. He'd forgotten about it because he was away at a conference. Long before there was ever email or anything like that, it was by telegram. And he quickly wrote out the telegram and he handed it to the girl behind the post office, and she was totally, he says, "Sir, is that really what you want to send?" And he looked at it again. He said, "Yes," he said, that's correct." "Sir, that cannot be correct." He says, "Well, read back what I've written. It says on this here, unto us a child is born 6 foot long and 3 foot wide." Just a first reading in Exodus chapter 1, please. And then we will just look back at another passage of scripture, and we will look at several others, all linked to the same theme. So, Exodus chapter 1. And just one verse that I want to read. Well, maybe I'll read a couple of verses. Verse 7. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, and multiplied and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there rose up a new king, or a new Pharaoh, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more than mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it came to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also our enemies, and fight against us. So go and get them out of the land. Verse 8. Now there arose up in a new king, or a new Pharaoh over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Turn with me back to Genesis and the 37th chapter. Genesis chapter 37. We're going back in history from when that verse was written. And in chapter 37 we read, And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. And the lad was with the sons of Belial, with the sons of Ziphlah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about you, and made obeisance unto my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. His father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed, shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to buy ourselves to thee in the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed her saying. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here am I. And he said, go, and I pray thee, and see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he went out of the vale of Hebron, and came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering the field. And the man asked him, saying, what seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, they are departed hence. And I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after them in Dothan. And when they, his brethren, saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired him to slay him. And they said one to another, behold, the dreamer cometh. Come thou therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that we might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass that when Joseph was come unto his brethren, they stripped him of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into the pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. Just to give the gist of the story. How is it that you remember someone after they have passed away? I had a good friend in England called John, an aeronautical engineer. And when John died, his family got together and they put together a book of memories and had it beautifully bound. I was looking at it in my study last evening, and they simply called it An Irishman Called John. And that is all the memories and things that were poignant out of John's life. When the late Dr. Ian Peasley died, Lord Bandside, they were determined to keep his memory alive. And that's the title they often use of the Bandside Library on the Newtonards Road. And I was involved in various activities there on different occasions. And they sought keeping the memory alive. But today, if you were to ask some of our young people now, a number of years on, since Ian Paisley went home to be with the Lord, and you would say Dr. Paisley, they're likely to say to you, Doctor Who? No, not the one on television, but the fact that they don't remember who Ian Paisley is. And the verse that we read together from Exodus chapter 1, and it says, there arose in Egypt a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, because 350 years had passed since Joseph had been alive, and all his descendants, they were now gone. It was away, consigned into history. But I wonder, when you think of Joseph, often preachers remember him under a series of P's. They will talk of Joseph being in the pit. They will talk of Joseph being in Potiphar's house. They will speak of Joseph being in the prison. And they will speak of Joseph being in the palace, slightly wrong order there, in the pit. And then from there to Potiphar's house. And then from there to prison. And then from the palace. But I want to do something a little bit different, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek tonight. I want to imagine that Joseph's two sons, their father may have still been alive, or he may recently have died. And Ephraim and Manasseh, they took the inheritance of their father, Joseph, and it was divided in two. And they wanted to remember their father. I'm sure as a little boy growing up, he would have told them some of the exploits of what happened in his earlier life. about how awful their uncles were to him, how wonderful their father Jacob had been. And he would have told them great exploits and about the Potiphar's house and about the prison and about being governor of Egypt and all these wonderful stories. I want you to just imagine, because there's no record that they did this, that the two boys got together and said, we don't want our father to be forgotten. We want to remember him, but we don't want to remember about the sort of things that everybody else has done, about the pit and about Potiphar's house and about the prison. Is there possibly another way that we could remember them? And they began to think. And perhaps one of them said, what about the clothes that he wore? Didn't he wear that fine coat that Grandad made for him? And wouldn't he have worn splendid robes of being the governor? And of course, then there was the shame of wearing the striped coat or whatever, of being in prison. The 5 demands wouldn't have worked back then. And then when he was a humble servant in Potiphar's house, even though he was well trusted, why don't we write a story about our father, about the clothes or the coats that he wore? And if I give you a title and you draw any other conclusion to it, well, I leave it up to you. I would suggest that after writing the book together, what title are we going to put over this book? Talking about our father's coats or clothes that he wore. And one of the boys says, I know what we'll call the book, The Coats Our Father Wore. And if you find any similarity, I'll leave that entirely up to yourself regarding Protestant history in Ulster. But it is true that Joseph can be known by the clothes that he wore. I know in the scriptures we're often said, my God does not look on the outward appearance, for he does not see as man sees. For man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks in the heart. When Samuel saw little David coming out of the fields in the shepherd's boy cart, he went, oh no, it isn't. But every time when the other brothers of David, sons of Jesse, come in, big, tall, fantastic bicep, and you can hear Samuel saying, oh, yes, it is. God says back, oh, no, it's not. And then the next son would come in. Oh, yes, it is. You can hear Samuel saying, oh, no, it's not. One of my greatest experiences in telling that story was in the open air in the city of Guntur in India. And I got the audience who were sitting on tarpaulins. And every time I said it in English, they said it in Telugu. Oh, yes, it is. And they shouted it back at me. And oh, no, it's not. But when David came in and he saw him on the outward appearance, oh, no, it's not. And God said, oh, yes, it is. Because you're looking on the wrong part. I, the Lord, look on the heart, the inward appearance, but you're looking on the outside. But that's not dispensing totally with that thought. Our people that we see in the street, our neighbors, our work colleagues, whoever that we come in contact with, the first thing that they spot of you and I is the outward appearance. And if that passes the litmus test, then we can get the opportunity to talk about what has happened inside us. If they meet us and we are angry or we're bitter or we're always moaning and complaining and groaning, when they see that on the outside, they'll not get a chance to look on the inside. So to look at the clothes that he wore, the very first item of clothing was the coat of many colors. Beautiful coat. He didn't just make it for all his children. Why was that? Because you see, Jacob had usurped his brother Esau and stolen his birthright, and Esau was blazing mad and Jacob had to run away. And his mother said to him, you go to your uncle Laban's house and offer to work for him, and you'll be away from the anger of your brother. Well, when he got to Uncle Laban's and he saw his daughters, he saw Rachel and he saw Leah, the older one, and his eyes just couldn't come off Rachel. Not at all. Leah should by rights have had to be married first, but he wanted only Rachel, so he worked 7 years for to get Rachel. At the end of the wedding ceremony, when the veil was lifted, he had been hoodwinked. He had Leah, dare I say it, the ugly sister. And he was devastated, but he wasn't going to give up. He worked again for several more years to be able to marry Rachel. Now, all of Jacob's wives were fruitful, and even the concubines that were permitted in his day were fruitful. But Rachel's womb was shut up, and she had no children. Jacob was getting older, but he had no children from Rachel. And then God opened up her womb, and she had Joseph. And only what other time did that happen? When she had Benjamin, his brother. But because it was the child of his old years, because it was his favorite wife, Rachel, he loved Joseph. And that's why he made him this coat of many colors. And that's why the message I've called tonight, as we look through the clothing that Joseph wore from Ephraim and Manasseh's point of view, the coats my father wore, the coats our father wore. The first coat we will come across was the father's coat. He would say to everybody, "Wow, what a lovely coat you've on you. Daddy got that for me. My daddy provided that for us." Brethren, this evening, when people look at us and they see how God has blessed us and what God has done for us, we do not say, "Well, it's all about me." Say, "No, my father's. I'm wearing my father's coat. It's the something that God has given me." If you see something of unique or different to the smile in my face or the way I live my life, I'm like Joseph. I'm wearing the father's coat. It was the coat that was a favorite coat. There wasn't another one like it anywhere in the country. We talk about things today that there's only one off. It's called bespoke. There's no other one like it. I have got some bags made in recent years, and they're made to my design, and they're bespoke. But this was the case of the father's coat. This was the coat of the very favorite son. Each of us, according to John's gospel, we speak of Jesus, he came unto his own, John records it. And his own did not receive him. But to as many who received him, to them give he right to become the children, or better rendered, I understand, the sons of God, even to those who believe in his name, not of the will of man, but of God. Not only a father's coat, or the coat of a favorite son, but it was an individual coat. Already said it. One and one only. There was nothing like it. And when he went to see his brothers who were jealous of him, as we have read about the dreams, etc., they knew the coat had to be part of the equation. They wanted to kill him and just bury him somewhere. But Reuben, we know, got him aside, and he was in a pit. And then they saw the Midianites, who were merchants traveling down towards Egypt, and they decided to sell Joseph. But they didn't just let him go with the coat. They took the coat, they killed an animal, and they covered it in blood. And then they went back to their father and said, "Something is awful has happened to our brother Joseph. Look at the state of his coat." And his father was brokenhearted because of that. It was an individual coat, like no other. There's no two of me, and my wife says, "Thank God." And there's no two of you. God has made you and me individuals, unique and unusual. Too many people would say, "I wish I were like her, or like him, or like them." Stop wishing your life away. God made you as you are with all your idiosyncrasies. I've often regretted I wasn't taller. I've often regretted other things in my life, if only I had. But that's not what God said. God made me as the height I am and the person that I am with the blemishes. Sometimes I look in the mirror and if you don't look closely, there are blemishes on my face, and I really do thank God they didn't pigmentize, they didn't become colourful or been an awful mess. But in the light, I look sometimes, but I'm an individual. I am unique in God's sight. Therefore, don't spoil your walk with God by saying and wishing only, if only, if only. There was one Joseph, and one Joseph only, because God created Joseph to be totally unique, because God had a purpose and a plan for Joseph. That wasn't the plan or the purpose of God for any of his brothers or any of his other family. God has a purpose. The psalmist reminds us in Psalm 37, the steps of a good man or a good person are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. It's our steps, beloved, that are guaranteed, not our quantum leaps. We're individuals. Thank God for who you are. Thank God for what you are. Thank God for what God has given you. Even dare I say it, thank God for the times when you nearly made a decision and went in the wrong direction and God stopped you because you're an individual. And even though you and I may be thrown from time to time, God is saying, you're my son. There's one of you. I only made one of you, and when I made you, I took the mold and I broke it in pieces because there's no copies. The only copy we have today are identical twins. I have a friend of mine, I went through college, and one of his children has had identical, ready for it, triplets. They are like peas out of a pod, 3 boys. Do you know how Granny and Granda and Mummy and Daddy, Mummy does it a wee bit better than Daddy. You know how they distinguish them? One of the boys always wears red. The other wear blue and the other wear green. That's the only way they can tell them apart. So can I urge you this evening and encourage you by saying you're an individual. God has made you you and no one else, and don't try to be anything else. Then Joseph had those dreams. He went before his brothers and they get rid of him. They took his coat back to his father, and that way they thought everything was over. Well, when the Midianite traders, they got to Egypt, they were going to sell him to the traders. And he went into the house of Potiphar, well-known man in the area, and he made him his manservant. And eventually he saw that Joseph being the individual, and even though Joseph had been chucked out by his brothers, and it seemed his life as a 17-year-old was a total mess. Let me say something to you. I'm going to put those down. Here's something what you and I need to understand. I call it the 4-5-4 principle, right? Take your right hand, leave your thumb. God is in control. Here's Joseph, hated by his brothers, taken to the land of Egypt, and is now in the house of Potiphar. And you can say, what on earth is happening? Why are all these things happening? Why has my life become such a mess? It's at that moment you need to remember God is in control. Where's your thumb? That's you, that's me. Keep out of it. That's 4. God is in control. Don't poke your nose in or the oar in. But then you say, as Joseph will say in a couple of moments, his life didn't get better, his life got worse. And sometimes when we're in a quandary, we think, well, surely it's going to get better. And sometimes it doesn't. Been there, I have. Take your left hand. And if you believe God is in control and you stay out of it, even when things are going askew or up the left, to use the vernacular, we need to remember all five, God is still in control. If we believe God is in control, when things are not going right, remember all five, God is still in control. And then 4, 5, 4. Let God be God. And Joseph was in Potiphar's house. Potiphar trusted him implicitly and put him over his house. And beloved, I've got to say this evening, if we are walking and talking and living for God, and the inside's the outside and the outside's the same, then we should be people that are employers, that people in our community, we should be people whom they trust implicitly. And in this case, Joseph was the faithful servant of Potiphar. He was the one that was there to do his master Potiphar's building, even though he could have complained about taking away from his family. Not only was he a faithful servant, but he showed by the coat that he wore that he was wearing the follower's coat. Oh, that we could say from day to day that people could see in us that we are wearing a follower's coat. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, the cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. But things were going to get even worse for Joseph. For his mistress set her eyes upon this young Hebrew boy. Now, history will tell us that perhaps Potiphar was a eunuch and he was not able to be intimate with his wife. And as such, in a situation discreetly, she would have found other partners for her to indulge her wishes. When she saw this young man coming into the house, she saw him as an opportunity to conquest and to get him to compromise. But Joseph was having none of it. He was the follower of God. He was the one that was going to be faithful. And you remember how she came to him on that occasion and wanted to be intimate with him when Joseph said, "No, I cannot do that with my master. I cannot do that with my God." And he ran away. And as Joseph was running away, she grabbed the end of his coat. She ripped it. And Joseph ran away. When Potiphar came home that evening, she complained that the servant, that faithful servant, that so-called follower of the God of Israel, had tried to assault her. But you see, Joseph, in wearing this particular coat, it was a coat of integrity. He was not going to let anyone or anything compromise what he's doing. And sometimes this world can put things before us on a platter and make sin and wrongdoing seem so nice, just like even the Garden of Eden. But you've got to remember, and I've got to remember, that I belong to Jesus and Jesus belongs to me, not for the years of time alone, but for eternity. The coat he was wearing was a coat of integrity. It also was a fine coat. He knew his master had given him a coat that was different from all the other servants, a coat that would show that he was the one in charge of the household. We used to note in many other trades years ago, a brown coat would have been a porter's coat, or a red coat, a porter's coat in the hospital. I worked for 6 months while I was studying, and we had to wear that red coat, and it always had to be buttoned everywhere we went. In later years, and took a sabbatical and working for an airline, we had to have our jacket on us and always buttoned everywhere we went to represent the airline. You see, you and I are representing God. When we say we are Christian, it's just not about words only, but it's the works that we do. And when the opportunity comes for people to compromise our faith and our walk with God, we must be like Joseph, prepared to wear the coat of integrity. It was a fine coat. The master had given it to him. His trust was there. And even though Potiphar's wife came and she complained about him, and of course she was believed, poor Joseph was taken from the house of Potiphar, brought down to the jailer in charge of the prison, and he got another coat to wear. This was the coat of the prisoner, the coat that showed that he was shameful because he had done something wrong, but even though he was an innocent man. How is the difference when people in some countries, they are prisoners only because of their Christian faith. And even though they wear the uniform of a convict, they have done nothing wrong. While he was in prison, even the jailer in charge of the prison realized that Joseph was quite a special young man. And when two of the prisoners, the butler of the Pharaoh and the baker of the Pharaoh, came in and they had dreams, and he interpreted them. One dream was that the baker would be taken out and executed, but the butler would be restored back to his master, the Pharaoh. And he made a request, please don't forget about me. Remember me to the Pharaoh. Tell him that I'm an innocent man stuck in prison. Beloved, I'm going to say a little aside. If you say to someone, or if I say to someone, I'm going to pray for you, do it. If you're not going to pray for them, don't make the promise. Often what I do is if I say, someone says, will you pray for me? I do it on the spot, not because I want to feel big about it, in case I forget, and bring them before the Lord. So he was in that prison for a period of time, and then, as you know, Pharaoh had dreams also, and he wanted someone to interpret these dreams because they disturbed him greatly. The butler remembered Joseph and brought him before the Pharaoh and said, this man interpreted my dream. Your baker, he was executed, but I'm back in your company because he interpreted my dream, and the answer was correct. The Pharaoh got the interpretation of the dream. For the sake of time, basically, that there would be a period of famine in the land. First of all, there would be 7 years of plenty. And then there would be a famine. And the instruction was that during those years of plenty, you need to bring lots of stuff into the storehouses so that when there is nothing to eat, you've got everything in your storehouse. When Joseph gave those interpretations, Pharaoh quickly realized that this special young man wasn't only good at dreams, but he would be the ideal candidate to bring all these things into the storehouse. We've seen Joseph wearing the father's coat. We've seen Joseph wearing a famous coat, an individual coat. We've seen Joseph wearing the servant's coat in Potiphar's house. We'll see him wearing the garb of a prisoner in the prison. When Pharaoh said to him, I want you to take second place to me in the kingdom, to become the governor over all of the city. And during those 7 years of plenty, I want you to get all the men together, and I want you to bring all that food into it. What they did with Joseph was they put another coat on him, a beautiful coat, a famous coat, and they put the chain of office around his neck like the mayor has. And when Pharaoh went out into the community, he would be there in his chariot, and Joseph would be behind him as the governor of the city. For those 7 years, all of the food was brought in. And then when it was the days of famine and people had to come from everywhere, including Joseph's family and Joseph's brothers, and how they came before him. You know the story oh so well. How the money was left in their sacks. How the silver cup was left in the sacks. How eventually Joseph persuaded them that they would only release one of them if they brought their wee brother Benjamin, the second son of Rachel. And when the father heard that, he said, no, I've already lost one son. I'm not sending another. He says, he's one of your other sons in captive. Unless you send him. So reluctantly he did. And Joseph stood before his brothers. Brothers didn't recognize him. The little boy of 17, because of the dreams, they despised him and got rid of him. They destroyed the coat. They made their father a broken-hearted man for the son of his old age, Joseph. But he cared not about it. And those visits backwards and forward between Gothen and Egypt to get the food that was there. Then Joseph stood with his fine coat, with the famous coat, the coat of the governor of Egypt. And he looked at them and said, I am Joseph, whom you sold into slavery. Do you remember those dreams that I had about bowing down the sun, moon, and the stars and the stalks? And you said, do you think you're something special that we're going about? Guys, what are you doing now? You're bowing down in front of me. The dreams that I had, like the other dreams that I have had between the butler and the baker and the Pharaoh, they all came true. Now the dreams that you despised me for have now come true. And his brothers were immediately afraid. This man, standing in the famous coat with the chain of office, had them in the grip, and he could have done anything he wanted with them. But he knew to take his brothers and be spiteful and to be bitter towards them would have destroyed his aged father. And beloved, even though in the world that we live in, when someone hurts someone else, they want to hurt the person that hurt them even more and to get better. That's not the way of the people of God. I was hearing on Sunday of a church going well in a certain part of Northern Ireland, and a few people decided to have their own way, destroyed the work completely. There are some people, if they cannot be captain of the ship, they would rather sink the ship than let the ship sail on. Joseph could have been so nasty towards these men, but he looked them, as we read in Genesis chapter 48, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Now go back and tell my father in the land of Goshen that Joseph, whom you lied about and said was eaten by animals, is alive and well and is governor of Egypt. And the reason that you have been able to be fed and you've not starved to death in this past number of years is because of wee brother Joseph. We did something because we hated his dreams. We thought we were in charge and we were in control and it was all about us. No, it wasn't. It was all about God. God had a plan. God's plan has come to fruition. You tried to harm me. You tried to destroy me. You lied about me. And even though later in history, in Potiphar's house, I was accused of being a sexual pervert of some kind and ended up in prison. And even there, when the butler and the baker were there, one died, the other was restored, and they forgot all about me. And now this is Joseph more than 30 plus years, 37 years, no, add on 14 to that, 40 some odd years. He's standing in front of his brothers, were terrified. But he says, no, I'm not here for to be spiteful. Go tell my father, in fact, better than that, tell my father and all our family to pack their bags and come and live in Egypt, where I am, and everything will be well. What a story. Not just about a pit or a prison or a Potiphar's house, a prison and a palace, but all to do with a coat. A father's coat, an individual coat, a faithful servant's coat, a follower's coat, a fine coat, all because God was in control. So the next time you think, beloved, your life is out of control, or it's not going the way that you had planned, just remember Joseph. Remember for the coats that he wore. No wonder the two boys, if they were to write a biography, the title was appropriate, wasn't it? The coats our father wore. May God bless his word to our hearts. Let's just pray. Our Father and our eternal God, we thank you for the rich truth that we have been sharing tonight from the life of Joseph. Help us to realize that what you have done and did do in Joseph's life, you can still do it for us. We come to you, our gracious God, as the great apostle Paul reminded the Ephesians, now unto him who was able to do exceedingly above all that you could ask or imagine or think, according to his power at work in you. Thank you, our God, that you took Joseph as a 17-year-old, and even though he went through dark and difficult death, it was all part of your perfect will and your perfect plan. And Lord, from the clothes that he wore, we can see as you worked in his life, so you can work in ours. Remember Brian at home, and we do pray, our Father, for his recovery and for the hospital appointment that he will go tomorrow. We pray, our Father, for the continued work amongst the older boys and girls in the Sunday school here in Bethel. We just pray for all those involved in it, and may your hand continue to be upon this place, we just ask in your lovely name.